I don't want it to be that these guys died for nothing. I want a positive aspect to come out of it, and if people can understand that if we're given the resources we need, if we're given the opportunity to provide this service, we can do a very good job.
A lack of resources has never been an excuse for unsafe practices. The buck always stops with the commander.
In this video, we'll look at some of the considerations a commander has in relation to operating aircraft under his or her command. Every unit in the Australian Army has been provided with multi-rotor unmanned aerial systems, drones, in order to increase drone literacy and to facilitate training and anti-drone TTPs. As drone technology improves, the use of autonomous machines to seek out and neutralise threats will increase. As a commander of a unit issued with drones, it is your responsibility to understand the governance and safety systems put in place so you can effectively manage this extremely useful tool. Let's take a brief look at the governance and where you can go to get the information you and your personnel need to operate the unit's drones. As aviation matured after the First World War, the governance accompanying it struggled to keep up. Where man and machine are put together, there is expected to be risk. This increases when the environment in which they find themselves is unnatural, such as in flight. Accidents in aviation were commonplace and even expected. When Army Aviation was formed in 1960, it came under the oversight of the RAAF. Airworthiness was dictated by RAF regulations, but with the Air Force's helicopters being transferred to the Army in 1986, the method of operating aircraft between the three services started to diverge. This can only be expected due to the different operating environments in which each service operates its aircraft. Since the Vietnam War, ADF aviation has had its fair share of accidents. In less than 30 years since 1980, 90 aircraft have been lost to accidents along with 88 lives. But it was the Black Hawk tragedy in 1996 that was a turning point in airworthiness and risk management. The tragedy's Board of Inquiry and the anguish it caused rocked Army aviation, as it found serious shortcomings in how aviation managed its risk, especially where it involved lack of experience and lack of recency, two contributing factors to the loss of 18 lives in that crash. Army Aviation, specifically 5th Aviation Regiment, led the way in how risk management was conducted, and it was soon that Army Aviation Risk Management, or AVRM, was the preferred way of assessing and managing risk in aviation operations. This was soon adopted by the RAAF. Airworthiness Governance matured also, and each service has its own airworthiness chain of command. The Chief of Air Force remains the ADF's Senior Aviation Authority and holds this position under the authority of, and responsible to, the CDF and the Secretary of the Department of Defence. All three services' airworthiness chains answer to him, and he is responsible to the CDF and Secretary for the oversight of operational airworthiness. Within Navy, the Commander of the Australian Fleet, COMOS Fleet, is that service's airworthiness authority and reports to the Chief of Air Force for airworthiness for the aircraft in the Navy's Fleet Air Arm. Within Air Force, the Operational Airworthiness Authority is ACOST, Air Commander Australia. Army's situation is a little different. Army Aviation branched into two distinct areas of responsibility. Operational control of Army's aviation assets fell to a new aviation brigade to control the three operating units. 16th Brigade oversees the 1st, 5th and 6th Aviation Regiments. The Commander 16th Brigade is responsible for ensuring all assets under his command are appropriately trained and prepared for operations, and he answers to the Forces Commander and the Chief of Army for operational aviation matters. In other words, the way we use aircraft to fight. Meanwhile, the responsibility for the technical airworthiness of Army's aviation assets was placed in the hands of Commander Forces Command, who is known as the Military Air Operator Accountable Manager. He takes advice on all things aviation from an aviation branch located at Forces Command, also commanded by a one-star. The Director Aviation, or DAVN, is the Senior Aviation Advisor to the Forces Commander. This is because he is best placed to understand the nuances of how Army operates its aviation systems and subsystems. So through his two one-stars, Commander 16 Aviation Brigade and Director Aviation, The Forces Commander oversees Operational C2 and answers to the Chief of Army for all Army matters in general, and specifically to the Chief of Air Force for aircraft operational and technical airworthiness matters. With 20 STA Regiment commencing operation of tactical unmanned aerial vehicles, airworthiness and aviation responsibility jumped from being a purely Army Aviation Corps issue to being shared with the Royal Regiment of Australian Artillery. But now, with the rollout of UAS to every unit in the Australian Army, aviation responsibility has become an Army-wide issue and the responsibility of a unit's command chain, with the unit CO ultimately responsible. The primary risk for Army's manned aviation in peacetime is arguably a handling error or a major mechanical malfunction that results in a crash and loss of life. The likelihood of this happening is extremely low because Army aviators are highly trained and highly practiced, and Army aviation maintenance is exacting and world-class. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for multi-rotor UAS. Operators are not highly trained in aviation, they do not benefit from regularly programmed practice, and the airspace is shared. And while the likely damage from a multi-rotor UAS crashing is very low, the potential to cause a safety event with a manned aircraft, due to, say, lack of knowledge of the rules or a lack of recent practice or a technical malfunction, is disproportionately high and must be at the forefront of unit-level risk management. It is therefore important to have a working knowledge of the rules and where to get further information. Firstly, a commander has a duty of care for his or her subordinates. The Workplace Health and Safety Act of 2011 is the overarching legislation that governs how all Australians conducting an enterprise must act in order to ensure their workers are able to be safe. The ADF is governed by this Act, with some exceptions. Secondly, ADF aviation is regulated by the Defence Aviation Safety Regulations. This includes operational and technical matters, that is to say, airworthiness. Thirdly, ADF aviation is overseen by a safety framework. Its remit is to educate, regulate and investigate safety and risk management. This is the Defence Aviation Safety Program. So how does a commander meet his or her obligations with regards to operating UAS? The easiest way is to be familiar with one key document and its references: the Authority to Operate Multi-Rotor Unmanned Aerial Systems, the ATO MRUAS. This document has been written to make it easy to understand and abide by the regulations in what are called standard scenarios. It allows units to operate approved MRUAS that are less than 2 kilograms and provides information on the system required to manage flying within the unit, known as the Flight Management System, or FMS. How the FMS is maintained is articulated in this document, and it requires the following to be compliant. Understanding the Commander Forces Command is a military air operator accountable manager for Army. Understanding that DG Aviation, Head of Aviation Branch at Forcom, is responsible for Army's aviation systems, including a unit's UAS. An SO1 Operational Airworthiness at Aviation Branch Forces Command has been appointed to oversee Army's UAS, their approvals and their controls. The Operating Unit CO is responsible for complying with the ATO MRUAS and for retaining and managing risk for operating MRUAS under standard conditions. The Operating Unit CO must be prepared to contribute, where necessary, to the regulatory oversight functions such as review boards and audits, and also to abide by the Defence Aviation Safety Regulations and other documents as outlined in the ATO MRUAS. The Operating Unit CO can delegate his authority within his unit in accordance with the DASRs. A Unit Flight Management System, FMS, should incorporate a suitable training and currency program for its operators. And lastly, a unit must abide by relevant airspace control functions in civilian and military airspace and any relevant base SOPs. For more information on operating MRUAS, log on to Forces Command's SharePoint page, where you will find more links to key documents and other resources such as UASnet on Army's collaboration site, as well as key points of contact to answer your questions about UAS.